So
Yep.
we have Nathan from the Election Truth Alliance joining us today because there are a lot of questions about elections. I just did a video the other day about the way that Donald Trump has been attacking our elections truly since his first day in office. He's been putting election deniers into his cabinet. And now, we're trying to get people excited to vote in this year's elections in November and the primaries in 2026. And folks are feeling a little suspicious of what's going on, or feeling a little out of control with either their local poll workers or threats from their local governors, just the destruction of the Voting Rights Act. So I'm glad that you're here to kind of talk to us a little bit about what your work is like. So can you tell us, what is the Election Truth Alliance?
Yeah, I got a few things I'll cover, but so the Election Truth Alliance, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We started and we came together in December of 24, just after the election. And really what we've been doing is we got together to investigate not only the 24 election, but we pretty much said we think that there needs to be a effort to make sure not only the 24 election, but every election afterwards is getting that double check, getting that verification that it deserves, because our elections are very important. And so the ETA has been, at this point, not only have we been growing as an organization, we have different people from different backgrounds. We have, statisticians, data analysts. We have some cybersecurity experts. We have people with PhDs in political science now. So really what we are is we're just a coalition of people, concerned Americans, that want to make sure that when our votes are counted, they are counted and they are counted correctly. And I give you a little bit of background about myself. I am one of the executive directors of the Election Truth Alliance. I mostly do public engagement. So I talk a lot. I show slides. I don't have any slides this time. It hurts me a little bit, but that's okay. We'll make do. And so my background, cybersecurity information systems. I was a 25 Bravo computer tech specialist with the Army, in the Guard and the Reserves. Then I got my degree with network security and commissioned as a signal officer and started actually doing radio, satellite, and network activity. And my civilian job before the election, I was a SOC analyst, so Security Operations Center network administrator. I worked with a company that did real-time network monitoring for banks. It's a lot of restrictions, a lot of policies. And actually what happened was right after the election, myself, Lily, and Jive, the other executive directors, we kind of got together because there were so many problems that we felt like weren't getting investigated properly. We had over 200 bomb threats right after, on election night, over 200 bomb threats, mostly blue counties, blue precincts, that we felt like just kind of got hand waved away. Those were attributed to Russian email domains, which is a serious red flag. There was a bunch of other things. And so at the time, we pretty much just said, well, why don't we start looking into this, right? Why don't we, look at what's publicly available? So the ETA had, at that point, got together and set out to do statistical analysis of elections. We've now applied the work of election experts that have looked at Russian elections and are world renowned. So we've redone their methods and we've applied them to the US. And then now all we do is we publish these summaries. We put out these reports on our website. We make videos about them. We talk about it. And we've continued the investigation now, and we brought up a few concerns. So that's
I saw you just published the 2024 U.S. election analysis, and there were quite a few concerns. There were some things that, really needed to be looked at. Can you give us kind of the highlights of what that report uncovered?
Yes. I wanted to jump on one thing, which you said right at the beginning, which was the concerns with election denial. So ironically, that was the first thing when we sat down and started talking about concerns with the 24 election is the label, being an election denier.
Oh, yeah.
And
the left is losing it. They're out of touch. Yeah, they're going crazy. They can't believe it. Yeah, no.
It was pretty strong. Just posting anything online would get you, hit with a label. And so main thing I wanted to talk about, and the reason why we're doing this work, is advocating for transparent elections. Doing audits is not election denial. That's what healthy democracies do. Canada has an extensive audit process. And really, so what we've been pioneering is we're saying, because our elections are so important, because they determine so much of what will happen in the next 4 years or more, we need to make sure that the elections are free, fair, safe, and secure. We need to make sure that the midterms are free, fair, safe, and secure, and that people are actually the people who are representing us were actually voted in by the people. And that's a really important. I don't think any American can push back against that. I don't like, there should be no reason. So now let's talk a little bit about what we started finding. As you said, we've done a few things. We actually started looking at the swing states. So the ETA
Mm,
has published on our website, electiontruthealliance.org. We've published, I think at this point, 3 reports, three different swing state reports,
mhm,
and 3 or 4 preliminary analysis on our Substack or on our YouTube videos for non-swing states.
mm,
And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'll just throw you exactly what the problems we're finding are. So we are concerned. I'm actually pulling up my notes here, just if you have any awesome questions. So we're very concerned that the systems that count our votes across the US could be compromised based on the statistical evidence we're finding. We're very
mm,
concerned that not only the swing states, but maybe even non-swing states, the systems we use to tabulate our votes could be allowed and allow you to manipulate your votes. And these are the things we're starting to find. When we've done our investigations, we've used these statistical methods to look at Nevada.
mm,
And we've looked at Las Vegas, Nevada, the most blue county, that's Clark County, in the state. And we're
mhm,
finding that when we actually get their public voting data all the way down to like the individual polling location or the polling precinct, we're finding that the math ain't mathing. Some of these places where you would expect very strong Democrat turnout, we're starting to almost see that after certain thresholds, the votes are leaning the other way. And
mm,
it's not making sense. And for example, Clark County, Nevada, we're finding when we look at their voting data, after around 200 to 250 votes cast per voting machine or voting session, then we start to see a very strong pattern where, for example, the Republican candidate for president begins to get more and more of the votes per that session. Even
mm,
in the middle of Las Vegas, where I think there's over 100 or 200,000 Democrat advantage.
mm,
So these things, and it's tied to certain voting types. And so we've published this a few times. We've done different types of analysis where we've looked at the presidential race compared to the down ballot races, and we're
mm,
finding huge differences there. But statistically speaking, we're finding that mail in, for some reason, looks far more statistically normal based on the methods of Roman Udot and Sergey Shpilkin, who are those election experts that look at
oh,
Russian elections.
right.
But early voting, or election day, depending on location, is where we're starting to find these red flags.
Mm,
And so Nevada is one place, Pennsylvania is the other, and same things. They have election day voting,
mm,
serious red flags there. Their mail in looks far more statistically normal. And one of the things we see in Pennsylvania, we see in North Carolina, and we're now finding in Florida, which we can talk a little bit about, but we're finding that since they vote by precincts, when we look at their votes statistically, precinct wise, we're finding that, for example, in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia County, Philadelphia, the city, like one of the bluest places, we're finding that it almost seems like Harris is winning at low turnout, and then you hit a certain threshold of turnout. For example, 60% turnout in Philadelphia, and in precincts that are 60% and above, it flips, and Trump is now
mm,
winning in some of the highest turnout count or precincts in one of the bluest counties in the state. Doesn't
wow.
make any sense. And so that's just some of the stuff we found. We've been publishing this. As I said, we're now investigating Florida. And some of the other works we've done is we've actually started going and doing on the ground investigations, working with locals, looking at their voter registration database,
Mm,
comparing these locations on the ground to what the numbers are saying. And we're finding pretty quickly that the people who live in these areas aren't matching the results
mm,
of what's going on. And so I'll throw a few final numbers at you, and then it's pretty much any questions you want me to jump on. The main pushbacks we get is there's 2 main things. They say, one, every election for presidential or whatnot, yeah, every state runs their own elections. Every state is
right.
responsible. Every county runs their own elections. Actually, it's like county level, and then it gets summed up to the state. Well, what we're finding is that although every county and every state runs their own elections, we're using the same systems. We're
Mhm,
using the same systems to count our votes,
mm,
and the same systems in some places to cast our votes as well.
mm.
And it's not who votes that counts. It's who
Who
counts the
counts the
votes.
votes? Mhm.
And so I'll throw a little bit of concerns at you. You've probably seen this recently with Dominion, but there's three major brands we use all across the US. I think it's at least 70% of the US, especially the swing states, use these top three systems, these voting systems. And they have optical scanners. They count your votes. We call them, tabulation machines or tabulation computers. And so biggest three, is going to be ES&S, Dominion, and Hard Intercivic. And what we have started to find is we found when we look at all three of those statistically in the swing states and non-swing states, votes counted by those systems have started to raise the same red flags we've been talking about. And one test we did recently is we looked at Minnesota, a blue state, and we actually looked at, they use some of the same systems that are used in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. And we looked at their voting results statistically because Harris still won that state. And we found that some of their precincts in some of their counties actually were small enough to hand count. So we said, listen, if there's a compromise of the tabulation systems, um, let's test places that didn't use these systems and let's see if there's a noticeable difference between the results.
Yeah.
And that is what we did. We did put that result or the report up on our website. It's a special report, Minnesota. It is hand count versus machine count. And to sum up the findings, we looked at precincts of around the same size of registered voters. So we said, let's compare precincts all across the county and all across the state that are the same size, maybe the same demographic of voters, right? Smaller rural areas. And let's look at how many votes Trump's getting and how many votes Harris is getting. And let's compare them to places that hand counted. And what we're finding is on average a 6 to 8% difference benefiting the Republican candidate for president. But this effect is also seen at the down ballot levels as well. So we're seeing like almost every Republican on the ticket is getting that same difference.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is we looked at nonpartisan races or ballot questions where we're not seeing the same effects there.
Hmm.
So it's very interesting. And it brings up the concerns that we've not made public yet, but we will be making public in some upcoming legal action, which is as we've investigated further and looked at the county reports, we are very concerned that if there's a compromise of these systems, not only could it be used to change votes, but it could be used to potentially change the outcome of not only maybe whole states worth of results, but perhaps the election as a whole. So those are our concerns. And any immediate questions or thoughts
Well,
on
one of the
anything
things
pushback?
No, I mean, we're just here to hear from you, and I think folks should go to the site and investigate, and I think there's a lot of people who, had a feeling or the math wasn't mathing for them before you guys did this investigation, but one of the things that I get asked about a lot is the Rockland County situation. Did you guys look into that?
Yes. So for a little bit of background, Rockland County, New York, Smart Elections / Smart Legislations has a lawsuit there where they've found problems. And some of the problems they've found and they've raised is they had a self-reported more votes for third-party candidates than were counted. So they
Mm,
had a bunch of different plaintiffs that said that they had voted in some of these townships or small areas. And there's some other problems, such as that noticeable drop-off from the president to the down ballots, like we talked about seeing in these other places.
right.
So we did actually do a little bit of a statistical review of Rockland County, and we're definitely finding the same red flags there. I believe
Uh-huh.
they use a slightly different system, but it's under those same major brands. And it just kind of begs the question. We get this pushback a lot. People are saying, well, why would you manipulate elections in places that you wouldn't win?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is we're finding that if it is tied to the systems, it would make sense that you're going to try and maybe not win in one round. But if you want to win and continue to win or continue to grow the results, it would make sense that you start at a lower level of manipulation, work your way up over across multiple elections. But
Mm,
we don't know. And there are some caveats to all of this. And first and foremost, statistical analysis is not proof of election fraud.
mhm.
It is at best evidence, right? So we've been putting out these reports as potential evidence that warrants investigation. And really, that's the other half of what the ETA is doing now. And the reason why we go around and we talk to awesome people such as yourself and lets us have these conversations is because we need investigations. We need people to know that there is a concern and we should be looking into this. We should be getting hand counts of the results in some of these places that are weird. We should be investigating because we need to know now if there is a problem, because if there is, it has to be dealt with before the midterms. And
Right.
that's really important is we can't, bury our heads in the sand right now. And I mean, the major thing is, as we said, this is a very taboo topic. The ETA has
Mhm.
spoken to multiple elected officials. We've reached out to governors, secretaries of state. The pushback is always the same. It seems they're afraid to say there's a concern
Mhm.
because they don't want to be labeled as a, election denier.
Mhm.
They don't want to bring into question our elections because they want people to vote. And we want people to vote too. We want people to show up. We want people engaged. But we also want to, as I said, we want to make sure that when they vote, their votes are being counted. Because if they're not,
What's the point? Yeah.
that is a very big deal.
Well, one of the things that I like about your site too, which is electiontruthalliance.org, folks should check out all the different reports, is there's also an audit advocacy toolkit. So we're not saying go out there and just be an election denier and be like, oh, my way didn't come my way, so it must be fraud. Like that's crap. But there are things in here you can do to ensure that your elections from school board to president are being properly counted. One is becoming a poll worker yourself. There's nothing better than having eyes within every room, and we need that. And I think folks were maybe not aware of like that was just something everyday citizens can do. Being a poll worker is an incredibly powerful position. Having a place in surveillance is important. But you have this audit advocacy toolkit and then a resource center. Can you talk about some of the
Yes.
because people don't have to start from zero here. They can use some of your tools.
Yep. So on our website, we have a advocacy toolkit, which gives you multiple scripts that you could read if you were going to call in or email your elected officials or your governors or secretaries of state. And the
Mhm.
reason that's important, and we're actually going to continue to like put out new pushes as we go, but the reason it's important is because if we want an investigation into, for say, Pennsylvania or some of these other swing states, their Secretary of State has the authority to launch an investigation if
Mhm.
they so choose. And that's why we want you to reach out to them and call them and make sure they're aware of these concerns so that, if we can leverage that and get them to do an investigation, even in just a few of these precincts to start, we'll very quickly know, was there a problem? Was there not? When the physical
Yeah.
ballots match or don't match the digital reports. And
Mhm.
main pushback we do get as of right now, especially with Minnesota, is that every state and every county conducts their own type of audit right after the election. And this is true. It varies very strongly from place to place. But what's interesting and what we're finding is that there's generally like two types of audits. You'll do some type of testing or certification of the machines. So you'll have them count some test votes before or after the election, which is great if there's any malfunctions to the machines. But if there's a malicious compromise,
Mm.
cybersecurity wise, if there's
They're
a
not doing
timed
it during the
window,
audit. They did it
right?
during the real count. Yeah.
Exactly. And you wouldn't like they would count normally before and after, but they wouldn't, you'd change things around during. There's actually an example of this. I talked about this recently when we talked about the Minnesota report and made a video. Most people aren't aware of this. Is Volkswagen back in, I think, the 2015s or so, they got caught because they were cheating emissions testing using software that
Mm.
was like, hey, are we being audited right now? Are we actually on the road? If not, their emissions were normal and legal and regulated. But the data, the math, right? The math wasn't mathing, and they got caught because the nonprofits at the time were like, the data emissions is way too high for what we're being told is the standard. And they took the Volkswagen vehicles and they drove them on the highway
Mhm.
and they tested them. They put like testing kits on the back of the vehicles in the tailpipe and drove them on the highway. And immediately they found out that Volkswagen was defeating their audits because they would only start manipulating emissions and ramp up emissions when in use.
Mm.
And so we bring the same concerns because you could do the same thing to our tabulation machines.
Sure.
And not only, well, potentially. And not only that, though, as I said, 70% of the US is using these top major brands, top three. And what's really interesting is we're finding as we've investigated these systems, um, just some numbers because it's really hard to kind of look at. It's almost like the companies are pretty tight-lipped about what they use and what they do.
Oh, sure.
They label it under proprietary knowledge or, I own the
The
tech, so you
IP.
can't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a black box is really what it is. And what's interesting is as we've started investigating these major systems, we're finding that at the precinct level for like election day or in-person voting, um, for example, in 24 election, like 68% of the vote across the US was hand-marked paper ballots. We're not using voting machines, right? We're using
Mhm.
paper ballots. And the other two was like 22% was like machine-marked paper ballots and maybe voting machines. What's interesting is even those, right? Even the hand-marked paper ballots, nearly 100% of all the votes cast in 24 were counted by a machine, a
Mm,
optical scanner, a tabulation, a vote counting computer. And
mm,
people don't realize that. And so
mhm.
that's really important is that all of our votes are being counted by these systems and these machines. And we started finding that some of these systems are connected to the internet. They do have cellular modems in them. So if you could compromise them that way, we don't know truly if they're what level or what scale. We don't know how you could do this, but the data is telling us there's a problem here
Something.
and it needs to be investigated.
This is the thing that freaked people out because Donald Trump can't help but tell on himself constantly when he was like, well, and Elon knows those computers inside and out, and Elon's going to fix Pennsylvania. That scared people. Do you think like,
So my inbox blew up during that
okay. Huh.
pre-inauguration rally because we had started kind of publishing things about it at the time, but we hadn't gotten to Pennsylvania yet.
Yeah.
And that was, I think millions of people saw it. The direct quote, I believe, is something along the lines of, he knows those vote counting computers and we won Pennsylvania like in a landslide. So thank you. And that was, during the live stream. As I said, we've been investigating Pennsylvania. We are very concerned. Um,
Yeah.
the main thing as well, let's see. I mean, it's a good point. And as we've started digging a little deeper, not only the systems that we use, as I said, we're not accusing any of the companies
No.
of manipulating votes. We're saying the data has raised red flags. We're saying that the systems, if compromised maliciously by a third party, for example, that could be an avenue to do this. And the people running the elections could do everything right.
Yeah.
The election officials could do everything right, and you could still potentially have this happen.
Yeah.
And the other pushback we get is, the audits that we do in some of these swing states, well, they're generally smaller in scope and they're like a sample. And as we
Mhm.
said, if there's a malicious compromise, and I count 2% of the audits or 2% of the ballots, the problem is if you're clever with how you manipulate things and you set a threshold or you set, high turnout as your focus, and the audits are only encompassing small amounts of votes in maybe the low turnout areas, you wouldn't catch this. And
Right.
that's really why we're saying, listen, the statistics tells us where to go look. These are the really anomalous precincts in these counties. We should go and we should double check these
Yeah.
precincts.
Mhm.
And we'll know very quickly, was there a problem or was there not? And
And
I
it goes
think,
both ways. It goes both ways, right? It's not just, oh, we want to catch a cheater. It's that people are going to deny election results if they don't like them, no matter which side
yeah,
you're on. And you want to have that infinite proof, that undeniable proof that the winner was the winner, whether that's your guy that won or the other guy that won.
and that's exactly what we want is we go verify the vote. If everything matches, then we are good to go. These concerns are just a fluke or,
Yeah.
something unique to the way people are voting. If they're not, as I said, we need to know. We can't, we can't look away, right? Because I mean, to be honest, elections are really the only way a normal American has an impact on what their government's going to do in the future, right? You choose who you want to represent you. But I think the other half of the battle people don't realize, and the reason why elections are really important is they are also about the ability to remove people who you don't like or who abuse
Right.
their power. And if
Right.
we don't have the ability to vote people out
Hmm.
because someone's got their thumb on the scale going forward, that
Hmm.
is a huge problem.
Yeah.
And we can't look away, right? That's really the point now is this is too big of a deal to look away. We can't ignore the vulnerabilities that we're starting to find. For example, we found that there were software updates to these major systems right before the election that were de minimis in nature, meaning that the machines were tested and certified before these updates came out. These updates came out, but because they were de minimis and labeled as non important, they didn't retest these systems or machines. And we're starting to find problems. Smart Elections has highlighted this in one of their reports, where they found that these updates seem to make some changes to the way the operating system detects changes. Um,
Mm.
so, and it's really interesting because cybersecurity wise, if I were going to compromise a system and it has some form of security that would alert you if there was like changes to the
Insane.
source or the file, and you turned that off, it's these are the types of concerns we're starting to raise as we go forward. And the picture is very, very concerning.
Are you worried about, I think it's Dominion just sold to a new buyer, or is it Smartmatic that just sold to a new buyer?
Dominion was purchased recently. They are relabeling as Liberty Voting or Liberty
Oh
Voting. Yeah,
God,
I believe.
that's a tell.
So, to be honest, as I said, the ETA is nonpartisan, nonprofit. So,
Right,
but we bring this up. Should any political party have influence over our voting machines or our voting systems, or should they be open source? Should they be, should it be legal to own the companies that count our votes? Is
right,
that not a conflict of interest? And
sure.
we're starting to find these systems are not open source. They're not independently audited. They're audited by select groups that we are concerned may not be as nonpartisan as ourselves.
Yeah,
We're
closed
also
society
starting,
doesn't work. That
right.
corruption, no matter what you do, you could be on a baseball team and that's a problem. Yeah.
Right. It's just it's a conflict of interest. And what we've started to find as well is when these audits are being done at the county levels, for example, not saying the counties are doing anything wrong. The problem is, for example, with my background in banking, right? I did some auditing for banking, I did some security stuff. You hire a independent third party to review, to audit, because you can't, own the system and be impartial. You can't
Right.
run
Of
an
course.
election and audit your own election process
Of course.
because I mean, even if you did nothing wrong and there are problems, you're going to be tempted to make sure everything looks right. And that's what we're starting to raise too, is we need independent audits because even if you did everything right and there's a third party messing with stuff, you're going to make sure, because it's
You
your
don't want to
job
look
on the line.
incompetent like you let the bad guy in, right? So people
Exactly.
have inherent bias to their own space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to make sure everything looks great. And as I said, you may have done everything right and it's still happened. So that's why we need these independent third party audits. That's why we need that second look, right? You ask for a second opinion from your doctor, right? Well, here we are. We want to double check, make sure our elections are, you know, on the up and up.
Oh boy. Well, I'm grateful that there's folks like you out there doing this. There's also an anonymous tip line at electiontruthalliance.org. If you are a poll worker or you're involved in your local community in any way and you think something's suspicious, you should send it in, have them check it out. Um, anything anywhere else folks should follow you for updates? Because I know this is like something people are extremely interested in.
Yeah, this is still underway as we right as we speak. So we're going to have some more stuff. Biggest one is we have a newsletter on our website. You can sign up electiontruthalliance.org/newsletter. We have our YouTube, we have our Substack. We put things out pretty aggressively across all of the social media. So yeah, we've got all the social medias. I don't run those, so we have awesome volunteers that manage those. And the other half is as we see forward, we do have investigations and we do have pending lawsuits.
Hmm.
I can't disclose where one of the lawsuits will be, but Florida is in the works, and we've actually started releasing findings in Florida.
Hmm.
We've partnered with a group, Allison Green, with It's Up to Us, her campaign and her
Hmm.
movement. She's on Substack now, as I think grassroots speak on, and so we've started releasing reports, and she's released her investigations. So that's continuing to be made public right now. So recently we just released the first look at Florida, talking about their voting systems, their machines. We've started finding, we did a statistical report and we're finding precincts that have more votes than registered voters and things like this.
Hmm.
So more of that is going to be released publicly very soon in the near future. So
Hmm.
follow us, follow It's Up to Us on Substack. We're going to do some joint videos and some joint live streams. And
Great.
as soon as we get these first wave of lawsuits out the door, we're pushing for these investigations. We're pushing for these hand counts. And I think that's what it's going to take um, for people to start asking the big questions and start helping us get answers. Is really that's what we want. Is we want to make sure we want you to vote in the midterms.
Yep.
We want you to be confident that your vote's going to be counted. And we want to make sure that, going forward, if this happened, we need to know about it and we need to stop it from ever happening again.
Well, you're very brave. You're welcome back under the desk anytime, especially once, you release these next reports, come back and tell us
Yeah.
all about it. And folks, make sure you're following Nathan in the Election Truth Alliance, Substack, YouTube, and subscribe to their newsletter so you're first to know what's going on, because it really is going to be a peer-led effort to ensure that our elections are free and fair for everyone, right? Everybody wants their vote to count. You don't want it to be, oh, well, if it's a Democratic governor, then none of the Republican, they're doing it, so we're doing it. Like, no, none of that shit, okay?
Yeah.
Everybody gets a fair
Yeah.
shake. So,
It, it's going to be, I say, there's a last little thing is really everyone should be engaged in this. It
yeah,
doesn't take anyone special. Democracy is not going to defend itself. So it's up to
yeah.
the people. And here we are. And really all we need is the support. And then as we go forward, we'll have some calls to action and make
Great.
it easy for everyone. So thank you so much
Well,
for having
welcome
me.
back anytime, friend. Thanks for updating us here. Just wild times, my guy. So I'm glad that there's folks like you and the rest of the crew out there pushing forward on this, because so often we feel alone and like nothing's being done. And then we meet somebody like you and we're like, oh, we're not crazy or alone. Stuff's happening. That's good. We can join them.
Thank you so much. You take care and you be safe. And yeah, I'll have some more stuff for you in the future.
You too, my friend. You too. Okay. Bye.